In prison, you live for that moment. You live for day to day.
Behind bars, Suge Knight isn't doing well. He was reportedly just attacked, and it seems that everything has to do with the shocking disclosures he has been making on his podcast. I have all the information, let's dissect it. Suge Knight is attacked in prison. News of Suge Knight being attacked in prison has been making the rounds on social media and the streets for a minute. Suge Knight's name always comes up when discussing real ones in the hip-hop game. This was no ordinary industry suit promoting documents. Once upon a time, he had grown men trembling in their boots. The one signed artist and made them famous. That same man is currently struggling in the pen. People noticed something odd. When Suge was given his current sentence, Suge kept an eye on his back. He even expressed his concern for his safety while incarcerated to the judge on several occasions. People didn't understand the significance of these remarks at the time, but now those moves are starting to make sense. To truly comprehend what's happening to Suge while he's been locked down, we got to understand how this whole situation jumped off in the first place.
One of the funniest stories I heard, Suge had an apartment full of producers. I guess they wasn't coming up with the right songs. And he gathered them all up and said, look, either y'all start producing some hits or I'm gonna start producing some.
Suge wasn't just some random dude who got lucky in the music business. This man came straight out the hood and he understood the streets in a way that most record executives never could, and never would. The Death Row Records empire that Suge built wasn't just about making hits. It was about respect, loyalty, and making sure everybody knew that this wasn't some game. Under his leadership, Death Row became the most feared and respected label in all of hip-hop, launching careers that are still legendary today. We're talking about Dr. Dre, Snoop Dogg, and of course, the one and only Tupac Shakur. Artists who didn't just make music, but also made movements. However, while Suge's reputation went deep in the streets, his legal problems went deeper. For years, the former Death Row CEO was accused of employing gang members and using strong-arm tactics to enforce his will in the music industry. The accusations were wild. This wasn't no corporate boardroom type of negotiating. Suge was handling his business the hood way, and that meant sometimes things got physical real quick. The rumors about how Suge worked became the stuff of folklore in hip-hop circles. Cats would gossip about how he reportedly got Vanilla Ice to sign over his royalties, how he had feud with Puffy and Bad Boy Records that grew so intense it contributed to the whole East Coast-West Coast war that ended up stealing Pac and Biggie from us. These weren't just rumors flying around. These were the kind of stories that made other industry folks think twice before trying to play games with Death Row. Beyond the gossip and accusations within the music industry, Suge's legal difficulties also encompassed probation and jail time. His path through the system started way back in 1987 with domestic violence allegations, then started stacking up with molestation cases, probation violations, and a whole bunch of other issues that demonstrated the law wasn't playing games when it came to Suge Knight. The pattern was clear as day. Every time Suge got into some conflict, whether it was business-based or personal, it seemed like the situation would transcend beyond just words. In 1992, Knight pled no contest to molesting 2 rappers at a Hollywood recording studio, receiving 5 years probation. That conviction became the evil that returned to haunt him. The event that really sealed Suge's doom happened in January 2015 outside Tam's Burgers in Compton, and this one was different since it ended with someone losing their life. SUG was accused of purposely running over 2 men, Terry Carter and CL Bone Sloan. Following an argument, one of the men was hurt and the other died. Prosecutors claim Suge was upset about being excluded from meetings and choices regarding the telling of his tale, and the entire matter supposedly erupted over some controversy surrounding the Straight Outta Compton film. Suge asserted that he was merely defending himself, claiming that they were attempting to set him up and that he needed to leave before things worsened. Despite his extensive defense, the CCTV film presented a different picture. It appeared as though Suge Knight was running down those individuals on purpose rather than attempting to flee from harm. Years passed throughout the ensuing court proceedings, during which Suggy sat in county jail battling the case while his health began to deteriorate and his empire came to an end. During this period, rumors began to circulate regarding his conditions in prison, with some people asserting that he was being singled out by other prisoners and experiencing various issues related to his safety. Knight pleaded no contest when Suge ultimately had to face the music in September 2018. In addition to the hit-and-run case, the plea agreement resolved a few additional accusations, such as robbery and threatening the director of Straight Outta Compton. This is where things start to go wild. An 11-year sentence for manslaughter was extended to 22 years because of Suge's previous convictions from 1987 and 1992. The third strike was then given an additional 6 years, and using the truck as a lethal weapon was given an additional year. Final total, 28 years in prison with no possibility of release until October 2034, when Suge will turn 69. line. The moment in the courtroom where Suge was sentenced was really intense. The relatives of Terry Carter went up there and expressed their feelings to Suge, calling him anything but a child of God, and made it plain that they wanted him to suffer for stealing their loved one. Suge was clearly feeling the weight of everything as he came to terms with the fact that he might have to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Suge was being carried away to begin his bid at RJ. Everyone at San Diego's Donovan Correctional Facility began to ponder the same thing. How would the man who had previously managed Death Row Records do, in a place where one's external reputation would not matter much? A spot where cats might want to test you to determine if you're truly interested in the life you say you're about. It wasn't just a change of address when he went from being one of the most feared CEOs in hip-hop to being just another prisoner with a number. It was like seeing the real-time collapse of an empire. Suge went from managing the careers of some of the greatest music icons to having guards and prison regulations govern every part of his everyday existence. As Suge got comfortable serving his sentence, it became clear that the main concern of the public was not whether Suge would live out his term. It was if he would make it out alive. Suge's life in prison. When Suge Knight entered the prison for the first time at RJ, the impact of Donovan Correctional Facility was unlike anything he had ever encountered. This cat made people jump when he yelled jump for decades. A supervisor whose phone call might make or break careers. In the California Department of Corrections system, he is now just another number. It must have been a huge cultural shock to go from managing Death Row Records to doing hard time. The days of driving fancy automobiles to the studio, hosting parties with the biggest names in entertainment, and exuding a sense of authority that made grown men hesitate before even glancing at him were long gone. Instead of waiting until Suge was ready, it was now count time, chow time, and lights out when they said so. Outsiders find Suge's predicament in the pen fascinating, not only because he is well known, but also because of the entire special set of circumstances that accompanied his notoriety. Suge Knight's identity was well known in the streets long before he was ever locked up. In contrast to some famous prisoners who might be able to blend in and stay under the radar, and in the prison system, a reputation like that spreads quickly. Almost immediately after Suge was processed in, the rumors began to circulate about what has been happening to him inside jail. Cats were discussing the threats from other gang members, supposed events with other prisoners, and all the other issues that come with being a well-known prisoner. The picture becomes considerably more complex when you delve deeply into what's truly taking place. The fact that Suge's health has been deteriorating ever since he was imprisoned is one thing that has been repeatedly stated and confirmed. We're talking about severe health issues that have some wondering if the man who was once such a commanding physical presence is now vulnerable enough to become a target. As he started to lose weight, his health rapidly deteriorated. Homie's weight decreased from around 350 pounds to about 315 pounds. You don't plan on losing that much weight. That is your body alerting you to a problem. Suge cited inadequate prison conditions, untreated injuries, and a shortage of insulin for his diabetes as the causes. Suge's 2017 hospitalization due to blood clots was even more worrisome. He attributed it to his solitary imprisonment and lack of access to appropriate medical care. It goes well beyond the typical wear and tear of working when you're discussing someone who has potentially fatal blood clots. It's an indication that there might be a significant problem. Suge's experience in prison is intriguing because of how his prior reputation both benefits and harms him. He entered the system with some ties that might offer protection because of his participation with the mob Piru Street Gang, which the authorities discovered in 2008. However, a closer examination reveals that those same connections also make him a target for rival gang members and anybody wishing to exact revenge for his time working for Death Row Records. Suge's place in that entire ecology must have been extremely complicated because prison politics is such complicated stuff. On the one hand, prisoners attempting to establish themselves may find him appealing because to his famous status. However, in a setting where reputations are put to the test on a daily basis, he cannot simply rely on his reputation to keep him safe, given his history of violence and intimidation. In a jail interview, Suge discussed the hard realities of the system and attempted to impart some knowledge. Two young kiddies who might be on the same route. This is one of the most candid views into how Suge has been managing his time. You get a unique glimpse of Suge's perspective on his predicament and his hopes that others will take note of his faults from the interview.
A lot of kids saying they get their input off of rap music or rap artists or entertainment. I think some of that could be true, but most of it, I would like them to understand that basically all the artists who's involved, and if they get in trouble, these guys have record companies back that will get them high-powered lawyers.
That alone demonstrates Suge's comprehension of the game's actual mechanics. The way the system handles neighborhood animals differs from how it handles wealthy and well-connected celebrities. He is essentially warning young men not to get it twisted, believing that if they get jammed up, they would receive the same treatment as their favorite rappers. Suge's remarks regarding cooperating with law enforcement and snitching.
He got caught with guns, and each time it's nothing. They're not gonna violate him. Because for the street guys know what I'm talking about. There's no puzzle. I mean, if you get a guy that constantly getting in trouble and never gonna come to prison, that's because he's an informant, he's a rat, a snitch, you know. And they're more important to the police on the streets than in here, because they let them know what's going on.
Also shed light on the code that regulates prison culture and street life. This viewpoint demonstrates Suge's efforts to manage his incarceration while avoiding more assaults. What's fascinating is how much Suge's prison experience resembles that of other well-known prisoners who have served time. Cats enjoy R, just like Suge, during their bids. Kelly, Bill Cosby, and others have been the target of well-publicized incidents and attacks. This demonstrates how insane these men's lives may be in prison. Particularly for Suge, the combination of his deteriorating health, the fact that he has been incarcerated for 28 years, and the psychological toll of his imprisonment may undoubtedly be taxing. Suge's legal team has been attempting to appeal his conviction and punishment on a regular basis, claiming that his rights were infringed upon during the initial procedures. Suge tried to have his sentence overturned in 2023, arguing that he was not given the opportunity to represent himself and that he was not given quality legal representation. Judges said his petitions were too late and lacked merit, thus his appeal was denied. Suge's fate was essentially sealed when he failed to make these appeals, indicating that he would likely be incarcerated well into his senior citizen years. Judge Laura F. Priver rejected his writ of habeas corpus in March 2025, stating that it was premature and dishonest. This effectively ended Suge's chances of being released early or having his sentence lowered. Suge's predicament becomes increasingly apparent as he proceeds with his offer. The former record executive will be incarcerated for several years, and he will accomplish this while negotiating the perils of jail life, particularly for someone whose previous actions have made enemies everywhere. What awaits Suge Knight in prison is the key question. The unknown risks that ahead, okay? Let's ignore the commotion and focus just on the potential risks Suge Knight may face while inside. Suge has provided us with the most genuine insight into his actual prison experience and his perspective on the criminal justice system as a whole. He has been strikingly honest about what jail life is like and what makes an inmate a target or safe in a variety of interviews and statements.
I know I was going to have to pay a debt to society before it's come to prison, because if you come from the inner city, you come from the ghetto, and you act up off that block, you'll come to prison sooner or later.
He is given while incarcerated. It's clear from that statement that Suge Knight is already struggling. Furthermore, it's uncertain what the future holds now that attacks have been reported. Suge's status as one of the most feared OGs in hip-hop makes these attack claims unsettling. Because of his reputation, violence is expected of him everywhere, including in prison. Suge has a reputation for utilizing violence and intimidation in his business dealings, making him a controversial figure in the hip-hop industry. He established a reputation of dread by using the threat of violence as a marketing tactic, and his participation in some of the most dramatic feuds and disputes in hip-hop served to further cement that reputation. Despite never having been indicted in either case, Suge Knight's name has been connected to the killings of Tupac Shakur and the notorious B.I.G. even after the demise of Death Row Records. Suge's name has remained in the public consciousness and on the streets due to the speculations surrounding these incidents.
I ain't never in my life told. You know, I'm the mother when people ask me if I know who killed Tupac, and not saying Tupac dead or alive, but I'm saying if they ask me if I know who killed Tupac, I'm the said, hey, absolutely not.
However, the rumors persist in spite of his denials, thanks to works like Greg Kading's Murder Rap, which claimed that Suge had paid Wardell Poochie Faust to kill Biggie. Additionally, it claimed that Shocker was the target of a bounty offered by Bad Boy Records Associates. One of the most contentious personalities in hip-hop history, Suge Knight has a history of conflicts with musicians, record companies, and even executives. Former buddy and business associate Dr. Dre was the target of one of Suge Knight's most well-known feuds. Suge assisted Dre in leaving Ruthless Records and founding Death Row Records in the beginning of the 1990s. They were a formidable team at initially. Dre created successful albums such as The Chronic, which contributed to Death Row's rise to prominence in the rap industry. However, their friendship deteriorated with time. Under Suge's direction, the label had become violent and disorganized, something Dr. Dre didn't enjoy. Additionally, he disapproved of Suge's apparent encouragement of conflict in the music industry, as well as his developing association with Tupac Shakur. Dre left Death Row in 1996 to launch Aftermath Entertainment, his own record company. This was not something Suge took lightly. In interviews, he ridiculed Dre and branded him a traitor. In songs like Toss It Up and To Live and Die in a, Tupac, who was close to Suge at the time, also joined in and made fun of Dre. Suge was beginning an even more perilous battle with Sean Diddy Combs, another up-and-coming East Coast tycoon. At the same time that things with Dre were breaking apart, in the 1990s, Suge Knight and Diddy had a vicious and perilous feud. Suge claimed that Diddy was responsible for the escalating rivalry between the East and West Coasts at the time. Suge also thought that Tupac's 1994 shooting in New York was related to Diddy's artist, the Notorious B.I.G. When Suge attacked Diddy on stage at the Source Awards in 1995, the feud grew more intense. His remark was a blatant jab at Diddy, who was well known for showing up in his artist's music videos. Suge's problems continued as the East Coast-West Coast rivalry continued. In the end, he even turned on Snoop Dogg, one of his own. Snoop Dogg was once one of the greatest names on Death Row. He became a major player in West Coast rap after releasing the label's iconic album Doggy Style. However, everything at Death Row began to fall apart once Tupac passed away, and Suge was arrested for parole violations.
Besides that, you have certain individuals who's artists, and they might get in trouble. They might do a few things, but they well-known names. They informant for the police. They snitches.
Snoop Dogg.
And if they get in trouble, they gonna get a free pass.
Snoop no longer felt safe and thought Suge was attempting to manipulate him. After leaving Death Row, Snoop joined Master P's No Limit Records in 1998. Suge started disparaging Snoop in interviews and courtrooms after feeling betrayed by this. He also claimed that Snoop was collaborating with the cops and being a snitch. In retaliation, Snoop called him a who is on his life. Suge Knight has experienced brutality, power, and recognition during her career in showbiz. Although he was instrumental in the development of West Coast rap, his propensity to instigate altercations and manipulate others by inciting fear has also earned him a lot of opponents. How about Vanilla Ice? Suge Knight began employing intimidation techniques before becoming the dreaded Death Row leader. Rapper Vanilla Ice was included in one of the first tales that demonstrated his flair. Vanilla Ice claims that Suge and his band visited his hotel and coerced him into giving up the rights to his popular song, Ice Ice Baby. If he didn't sign the documents, Suge allegedly threatened to toss him from the balcony. The narrative became a part of hip-hop legend, even though Suge later denied the balcony aspect. The world saw for the first time in that incident how Suge Knight used violence, threats, and terror to achieve his goals. There's the thing now. Even in prison, Suge Knight suffers greatly from having so many enemies, particularly in the entertainment sector and on the streets. For someone like Suge, however, prison is far from being a place where all external turmoil ends. His huge number of adversaries may actually increase his internal vulnerability. Suge's rivals are not limited to competing rappers or former business partners. Many of them have ties to gangs, record labels, and influential industry people, many of whom are said to have contacts in high places both on the streets and in the music industry. Some of the same ties could still be influential while incarcerated. Because of his prior behavior, Suge might make a lot of enemies and incarcerated. Beyond the damage to his reputation, Suge's financial predicament demonstrates his powerlessness within the system. Lydia Harris, who claims she was forced out of Death Row Records, won a $17 million verdict against Suge Knight in 2005. Death Row Records was already insolvent by 2006, and Suge filed for personal bankruptcy, owing $137 million. Knight's previous power is further diminished by these financial difficulties, which deprive him of the assets that once offered him influence and protection. Suge's remarks regarding his incarceration have shed light on how he has been handling the difficulties of prison life.
What would you like to say to them about the mistakes?
About the mistakes that I wouldn't, everybody makes mistakes.
Given that he now has a thorough awareness of the unspoken guidelines that regulate how prisoners interact with one another, his remarks regarding errors, violence, and survival demonstrate his desire for improvement. For years, Suge Knight has kept up a solid reputation, but regrettably, it might not be enough to shield him from the difficulties of life behind bars. It's plausible to assume that his lengthy beef history may have followed him into prison, transforming what ought to have been a peaceful setting into a hazardous battlefield, full with resentful old foes and unsolved grudges. However, what do you think? Write it in the space provided for comments.